So ZSpheres is what we're going to look at today. So they've got this nice, beautiful example here. We're not going to worry about getting to this level, but the idea of ZSpheres is that it's a way that you can start producing an armature. Don't think of it as a sculpt. It's a way to produce an armature, just like in traditional sculpting, where you would use wire and aluminum foil to bulk out your sculpt. And then the clay is just thin layers on top of that volume, right? Because if you were going to work that way, you would have a massive, heavy lump of clay that's very hard to yield and also to pose, right? So the problem with spheres is that they're very round. And I know a lot of the designs I see have rather sharp angles and edges. So do you think this tool is going to be good for that? Probably not, right? So that's something to also consider. I'm not trying to get my design completely figured out in terms of the shape, but I want something that I can pose. And that's the real feature of ZSpheres, is that you can actually treat it like a simple rig. All right. It's very, very quick, easy to set out, but there are a few pitfalls. So let me just go over here. So you have the light box, there's a ZSphere, double click on it, and here it is, right? So this is now a ZSphere. And you can see that the brush has changed. We're now in this Z sketch brush. And the sphere itself here, the root technically does not contribute to the model. So the root is special. You can't delete it. It's just a starting point. So sometimes when I'm building a skeleton, if you can do like a humanoid bipedal skeleton, I sometimes treat this as like the tailbone. It's mostly useless, right? So I just have it off to the side of the hip and then build off of it. But I've seen other people use it just as the hip, right? Or the abdomen. Totally fine. But you just have to be aware that it won't contribute any geometry. So while you're in this ZSphere tool, you can see that when I click and drag, what happens is now I've got two more ZSpheres because I've got symmetry turned on. There's two things that you're going to be using. Draw, which allows you to add and remove ZSpheres, and then move, scale, and rotate just to manipulate. So if this is all that I wanted and I go to move, then I can click and drag and I can move these spheres out of the way. If I want to change the scale, well, I go here and I can scale up or down the ZSpheres. All right. Now, if I want to get rid of them, I have to go back to draw mode, hold down Alt and click, and they're gone. Now, if you're going to do the spine, of course, you don't necessarily want to have two, right? You probably just want one. You'll notice that when you get close to the center line, you get that green lock, right? So it snaps. So then you can go right to the top here and then click and drag. When you tumble around, you'll notice that the angle that you're drawing it in influences how it's going to turn out of view. So if you just work in a front view, you may think everything's okay, but when you turn around, you'll see, oh, okay, because of the angle I was pulling out the ZSphere, it's not exactly going straight up, right? So if I go back to W move, and I can move this up, and what you can also do is if you go to move, you can see I need more. Let me just click and drag and pull up some more material here. One way to manipulate the ZSphere skeletons, you go to the actual ZSpheres, right? So you just change that. But if you go here and click on the gray, it kind of acts like a bit of a rotation. I'm still in the move tool, but it allows you to move and adjust like the skeleton a bit more quickly than going to each individual little ZSphere. Now, when you're building, let's say I'm going to start from, if this is like the chest, and then I'm going out here, then I would say that's like the clavicle, right? Going from there to the shoulder. Then I'm going to build down. So I'll go back to draw, click and drag, W, move that down. And if I wanted an elbow, instead of like trying to continue and then draw and say, okay, there we go, I'm going to move that. What I would do is in draw mode, you can click and it will add. So rather than trying to go, okay, well, the neck is connected to the scapula, to the shoulder, to the elbow, to the wrist, what you can do is just do a big one and say, but that's arm. And how many joints do I need? I need wrists, I need elbow. Now, when you want to manipulate things, this is where it can become a little bit frustrating if you have your brush, which is really big. The problem is that sometimes when you're trying to manipulate something, it won't let you select what you want, and it's because your brush size. It interprets that as what you want to move, right? So when I'm working with ZSpheres, I usually turn the brush size to microscopic. So that way I can work on one ZSphere at a time, because depending on what you're building, you're going to have different scales and different sizes, and you want to make sure that you're able to work properly. So turn your brush size all the way down, and I would probably work with the mouse just because of the frustration that can sometimes happen if I go back to draw mode. I just tap there. If I'm not paying attention, I can see it there, but I may not know what that was. And if I click over here with probably a couple more that I've thrown in here, that can happen. And then when I scale this up or down, I've got these weird phantom Z-spheres that are really getting in the way and causing me a lot of frustration. There are a couple of keyboard shortcuts when you're drawing that you can try to use. If you really want to maintain the same volume, what you can do is before you let go of creating a Z-sphere, you can hold down Control to start dragging. And then if you let go of Control or hold Shift at the same time, then it will lock the size. I've never really been that worried about being that kind of a keyboard maestro. I find that slows me down. I'd rather just click and tap a bunch of points and move them, and then I'll just go and scale them. But whatever you want, I just want you to see. This info is in the PowerPoint, so you don't need to write it down, right? It's there for you to look at later. So when you hit A, what should happen is you'll get a preview of this. Okay, so that's what the geometry export will look like. It's still ZSphere, but if I hit A, it gives me a little preview. This button lives down here. It's called Adaptive Skin. This is what we're using, okay? So hitting A is the same as hitting preview. When I turn on the wireframe, you'll see that what you get by default is a rather dense mesh. This is not bad if you wanted to sculpt from that, but I think for most people, this is just going to be a proxy. Most of the skeleton you might even not use. You just can use it as a building point, as your aluminum wire and filler. So what we can do here is we can play around with some of the settings here. So what we'll do here is I'll crank this all the way down to 0 and maybe the density to like 3. And then when I run a preview, I get something that's a lot lower detail. I think that's a much better way to go because then you don't need that much detail. And again, if I hit A, I can continue to edit this, right? So I can change the pose, I can move things around, I can add more, and then just toggle, just hit A every once in a while. But if you don't have this on, then the problem is you may not see the level of detail based on the default. So with moving, again, I talked a little bit about you can move the individual spheres. You can go click on the gray parts and it kind of acts like a small rotation. The other thing that's kind of useful is holding Alt. So if I go here and I hold down Alt, it allows me to move the entire chain, right? So instead of having to go one at a time and move this up and then this up, if I just hold down Alt and click on a gray, right? You see that just lifts the whole model. But I hold Alt here, it lifts that entire chain. And if I go down here, then it's a way that I can quickly move the arms. So if the arms had more detail in them, let me just do that. So if I have a couple more joints in here and then I hold down Alt and go to move, then you can see that I can move the entire arm chain or the leg chain. So scaling, again, you can do individual Z-spheres to try to bulk up the volume. But again, there's a couple little keyboard shortcuts that have to do with clicking on the gray areas between the Z-spheres and then also holding Alt. So Alt is a way that you can just kind of globally affect an area to make it either really big or really small, to make it skinny or thin. So if I go to scale one Z-sphere, I'm just affecting that. Okay. If I hold down Alt, start Control, and I scale. Okay. Control. There we go. So you can go and scale everything. And then holding Alt, you can see that if I go to the root sphere, I can very quickly make everything really skinny. And this can be very useful if you're trying to troubleshoot where a problematic area is. Like I know there's a Z-sphere in there somewhere. It's driving me nuts. I don't know what's going on. Then you can try that trick. Okay. The other thing that can happen, I'm going to try, this happens all the time when you don't want it. But when you do, I may not get it to work. There we go. Can you all see that weird little gray preview? What that means is that ZBrush is getting confused. And that means that in that area, the geometry may not behave properly. So whenever you see this gray preview, it's letting you know that the way that they're kind of magnetically combining, there's an issue. So if, for example, you brought the arms, let's see, really close to the body, it might be okay, but you'll probably reach a point there. You can see some snapping, right? So what might happen is if the arms are posed too close to the side of the body and I hit A, it might work, but there could be some areas where it kind of explodes or just some weird stuff. Rotating is very different than what we're used to seeing. If you use the rotate tool, it depends on the angle. So if I'm looking at a front view, it rotates the arms out that way. But if I'm in a side view, it rotates them out this way. And if I'm in a 3/4 view, it kind of rotates them out that way, right? So it's very different than other 3D tools where you get a manipulator, right? But it's a way you can modify things, and you just have to make sure you think, oh yeah, I got to be in a side view. Then I can change the pitch of the spine. And with the arms, just have to pay attention. We like down when I go here. Now, technically, you can rotate an individual Z-sphere. So if I click on it and I'm in the rotate tool, let me just turn off this. And then if I go to rotate, there, it's really hard to see. But if I go here, I get the whole arm, but you can twist. You see that little red line? It is twisting just ever so slightly. And you can see now the lines, you see how they've kind of twisted a little bit. So pay attention to that, because sometimes you may want that as a way to correct a problem, or it could be you weren't paying attention. You created a problem. Now you just need to unwind that end joint so that the geometry isn't sort of twisting around. So the next stage of this is if you're happy with what you've built and you hit A, what do you do next once you've got your ZSphere skeleton? When you have it as like a preview, if you look at what I have over here, it lists the tool that I'm working with, and it's ZSphere 1. If I go looking in my subtool list, there it is, ZSphere 1. If I'm happy with this and I want to make geometry, what it will do is it will make a copy of that geo as a separate tool. So you will have two things, the original ZSphere and then the export. Once you make that export, they're not connected anymore, right? So you would have to go back to your ZSphere, edit it, change it, and then export out a new exported adaptive skin. So down here with the adaptive skin, there's a little button which says make adaptive skin. And if I hit preview, right, this is where most people get confused. This is my ZSphere. I know because if I hit A, I can go back and forth. Okay. But what most people do is they stay in the preview and then they hit make adaptive skin. And it looks exactly the same, right? What you'll see now is that there are two tools. One of them is called skin and one of them is the ZSphere. So how do you know which one you're in? Hit A. If I hit A, I am in my ZSphere tool. If I wanted to see the skin and I click on it, now when I hit A, nothing happens, okay? But they look identical, right? And this is where most people, if you're new, you're going to get very confused. So there is a ZSphere. Make sure you toggle it back to the ZSphere. So that way the icon, everything looks like it should. It's a ZSphere project. And then if I want the skin, I go here. So the skin now is going to behave just like any piece of geo. Right now I can sculpt on it, or I can use the move tool, my brush size. There we go. All right, so now I can sculpt on this. I can do everything like we're doing with just a normal bit of clay. But this is no longer connected to the ZSphere. Okay, they're two separate things. If you don't like the skin, right, then you make sure you're here, right? You make sure you're in that. You go here to the subtool menu, and then you would say delete. And it's going to warn you, once you say yes, bye, 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 right? Unless you save your work. And then, okay, now it's gone, right? And I'm left with just this poly mesh. So it will leave like a little container But I can always go back to my ZSphere, double check. Yep, that's the ZSphere. I can go change it, modify it. And if I want to make another adaptive skin, I just have to go find the menu. Okay. And then do a little preview. And again, you don't have to listen to me. If you want billions of polygons, you can absolutely. You can go that dense. And then when you get your export, it'll have lots of clay, digital clay for you, right? Very, very dense mesh you can work on. Now, the other pitfall that happens is sometimes people have the preview, but they forget to do the adaptive skin, and they start sculpting on the ZSpheres, which you can do, much to your chagrin, okay? Because now what you have is something that is neither, so hit A, the preview mesh. Would you like to store the modified preview mesh as a new polymesh 3D? This will cause the headache, right? So the best thing is let's hit cancel. It will undo those moves, right? And we go back to our thing. Okay. So when you're in ZSphere mode, don't try to sculpt. Don't try to add anything. It's just move, rotate, select, and draw. That's all you can do.